Welcome to the Global discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Salla Westerstrand here today on the Global discussion. Let's begin, Salla, by asking you maybe to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for our worldwide audience. So over to you, Salla.
Yes, thank you, Simon, for inviting me to the podcast. It's a delight to be discussing with you today. So I'm a technology ethics expert. I work both in academia and industry to advance ethical AI in general. I work as a researcher, as PhD researcher in the University of Turku in the Future Ethics Research Group, as well as in the industry as AI designer. That's actually my current full-time endeavor, to work in the industry to bring the knowledge into practice, to focus on sustainable development and deployment of AI. And I'm also an AI ethics lead at Women in AI Finland, so to advance diversity in the field of AI. And occasionally I do talks, panels, working groups, such as currently in the one government working group on citizen participation in public sector digitalization here in Finland. So quite a few things around ethical AI, sustainable AI, responsible AI, however you want to call it. It's quite an interesting set of positions that are surrounding me currently. So yes, but all in ethical AI, to make sure that our AI development is heading towards as ethical direction as possible.
Well, listen, Salla, it's great that we're talking today because, look, you can't get a more interesting topic than AI at the moment. Everybody's talking about it. It seems to be going across businesses, individuals using it, the biggest global brands to the smallest startup. So AI seems to be everywhere and getting more and more updates all the time. But you've touched on the important topic, which is the ethics of AI. So maybe could you unpack the ethical side of AI, maybe a little bit more from some of your sort of viewpoints, particularly as at the time of recording, we're looking at the next year of AI. And things are getting a little bit complicated. We've seen various legal cases. We've got lots of people concerned about AI. We've got lots of people really excited about AI. Where does the ethics side of this fit in from your viewpoint and your experience, Salla?
Yeah, well, from my experience from the research in ethical AI, because in my research, I'm focused on ethical directions of AI that we are currently heading towards, as well as how AI impacts our democratic societies and the societal structures, basically. So in that context, ethics is about what AI systems actually do to people, to our environments, to our societal structures, and whether that leads to good results, like for everyone, not just 1% who gains monetary benefits from the development of AI, but also to figure out how the technologies could work as well as possible for as many people as possible. So basically, we are often talking about responsible AI. That's one kind of broad term. We're talking about sustainable AI, for instance. In the company that I'm working for now, we're talking a lot about sustainability, which covers many areas. It's covering environmental sustainability, but also societal sustainability, economic sustainability. So we're hearing all these kind of buzzwords around AI, and it's often hard to actually pinpoint what we're talking about when we're talking about these different dimensions of responsible or ethical AI. So for me, ethics is actually about going through the reflection of the very ethics, so the moral philosophy of things. What are the consequences of our technologies, the use thereof? What rules might be guiding us? What kind of values might be guiding us when we're developing these technologies and deploying them? And whether these are actually leading to good outcomes or good structures societally and personally for people. So that's basically going into the very, very, very details of what is actually right and wrong in these situations when we face moral dilemmas, because there are always moral dilemmas. We are faced by trade-offs. We might want to focus on some values like privacy. At the same time, we might be compromising in transparency in some systems. So there are always trade-offs that we have to make. And ethics is about figuring out how to balance those trade-offs and how to actually recognize when we are in these situations when we have to make these choices. That's perhaps in the
Thank you,
nutshell.
Salla. Yeah, makes sense. And the thing that I want to ask you as you were talking there, it reminded me of, say, some of the more recent regulations and say the EU AI Act, for example.
Yes.
And the thing that I was thinking about as you were mentioning the ethics point that you were making is that just because regulations are brought in and just because the legal side of it is sort of rubber stamped and approved, it doesn't necessarily translate to being ethical, does it?
No, it doesn't. You're absolutely right there. Although we have the provisional agreements on the EU Act, we're still in the development, of course, of finalizing the text as we speak. But at the same time, even though companies are going to be compliant, I hope we are working with some clients towards the compliance already in terms of AI governance. And still, after compliance, there are questions that remain. EU, for instance, it has, of course, limited mandates in the first place to regulate. So it has its own principles such as proportionality. It can't do everything it wants. It has to be, there's a principle of subsidiarity. So it has to make sure that every possible measure has been taken on local, national level first before moving to the AI regulation. So it really has this certain kind of mandates to its regulation, like any regulatory body. So after compliance, even if we're 100% compliant with the UA Act or any other regulation, there are still questions that remain, and these are the ethical questions that we really need to spend time on even after compliance. Yes.
No, it's a great point that you make, Salla, and it kind of, for people who've been through the maybe GDPR in Europe from a data compliance perspective, it's different in the US, it's different in California, it's different in the Middle East. You know, it's not the same. And whereas the internet and I suppose AI to some degree has the ability to cross borders, you know, in milliseconds, you know, in the blink of an eye. The regulations are always playing catch up, aren't they? But then, as you quite rightly say, there's the whole ethical side of it that sort of sits maybe in parallel, maybe needs to be worked through after the regulations. But it's going to be very interesting as AI continues to roll out globally, as more and more people get access to it, whether it's cloud-based AI, whether it becomes more device-led AI. There are huge ethical questions, and it feels similar to me to the data regulations. But it's a huge topic, isn't it? It's a huge complex area, which I'm sure you know a lot more about than I do.
Yeah, it's complex, and as you mentioned, there are like a lot of different data regulations as well, and they are kind of overlapping. They are interconnected in many ways, as well as, and I think that's something that we often forget, that AI is not something that is not being regulated at all. Like I said, data regulation exists, but also all the like fundamental rights regulations that we have and charters, those all apply to AI as well. So we actually have plenty of sectorial regulations that apply to AI technologies as well. And that can actually be seen also in the EU AI Act. There's a lot of references to other regulations, human rights standards, charters, and all this stuff that we actually already have. And we would actually need much more mechanisms to enforce the existing regulations and the existing frameworks that we have in place to make sure that they are actually applied also in the context of AI. And I think copyright is one example of regulation that is now kind of being tested by case of AI systems in the form of lawsuits being pursued against, for example, or big AI providers. So it will be interesting to see where the decisions fall in these
Yes,
cases.
I mean, at the time of recording, we've got huge discussions, or legal, I should say,
Yeah.
matters between things like the New York Times and OpenAI. I mean, these are huge cases that are
Yes.
going to be poured over for many, many months, I'm sure, before we get any sort of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
I want to come back to something you said, though, if I can, because you mentioned at the top about your involvement. And I know you are now working with the Women in AI Finland as
Yeah.
this sort of AI ethics communication sort of leader. Can you tell me a bit more about Women in AI and what goes on there and how that's sort of impacting the important work that you're involved in?
Yeah, Women in AI is a global organization. So this Women in AI Finland is a like national chapter, local chapter of the organization, and it has a goal of advancing diversity in AI, in the field of AI. Of course, traditionally, it's been male-dominated area, let's say. So we are aiming to bring more awareness about how AI is being, how people can actually build their careers in AI, what kind of skills they could use in the field of AI. So basically, we are organizing events, career events, talks, mentorship program, different learning paths. For example, we did one with AWS just this fall to bring free courses, free seminars for people to get more familiar with AI and perhaps lower their threshold to get involved with careers in AI. Because we need more diversity, we need more women, we need people from different backgrounds to work in these positions to build AI that actually looks like people who are using the technology and that works as well for everyone as it does for some portion of society and of population. So that's one thing.
It makes sense, Salla, because you mentioned the importance of bringing more women into AI, and it reminds me of the word that comes up a lot with AI, which is bias.
Yes.
Whereas whether it's the people originally inventing some of this stuff and working on the large language models, and then the data that goes into them, and you can really look at this under the microscope, and I'm sure you do from your perspective. But if you look at the fact that most LLMs to date historically have been in a very small number of languages, for example, very, not necessarily a global data set by any stretch of the imagination. And whether it's male bias or whether it's country or cultural specific biases, all this gets fed in. And I know one of the big questions or one of the concerns that comes up when it comes to ethics is that as these AI models, as these LLMs continue to maybe now feed each other, meaning things that are generated get fed back into the data set, that it becomes harder and harder to get to the facts of the matter or to maybe remove some of that bias. Am I being too pessimistic there, or is this a really big challenge?
I think it is a big challenge. It's partly because we are always looking, or we are always using historical data, basically. And in many of these cases, the historical data is already biased. So we are facing a big issue with making sure that the solutions we use and the actual actions that people make based on AI's output are not systematically biased. And because those systematic biases can be really hard to detect. Of course, humans are sometimes biased as well, but it's much less systematic. And the systematicity is the very big issue in AI in terms of bias that we cannot really ignore at this stage. And when it comes to ethics, bias can often, because often ethical dilemmas, when we know that bias is wrong in this sort of value context that we are, for example, in Europe, we know that we do not want harmfully biased outcomes. So in a way, there is no ethical dilemma in that way, because we know what would be the desirable outcome. But when we run into situations, for example, where a model would be very, very accurate, let's say 97% accurate for a certain part of the population, but at the same time, it would be much less, say 50% accurate only for some other part of the population, such as Black women. Then in that case, it becomes an ethical dilemma whether we want to decrease the accuracy of the system for everyone equally, let's say to match like 90 or 85% accuracy for everyone equally, although it means that for some people it will be less accurate. So in these cases, we're really in these situations where we need to balance the trade-offs. Do we want to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy at this point to make sure that it's as accurate as for everyone as it is for some. So these are the kind of very nitty-gritty details that we have to be able to figure out and also communicate to people who are using and who are being subjected to these systems and the outcomes that are made using these systems. So I think bias can really bring very multifaceted consequences and impacts that we need to really figure out how to deal with.
Oh, for sure. And as you was talking there, I was thinking very much about facial recognition technology, for example, and whether you're a big fan or whether you think it's the worst thing coming down the tracks. But there are huge biases built into that because of the data sets, aren't there? And you know, that is a great example where bias is certainly in there because of the data that some of these facial recognition systems have been trained on. And some of them are improving and some of them aren't. But when it comes to maybe some of the more positive aspects of it, we are seeing AI helping us to do much better, faster research in things like healthcare, aren't we? And I know there are ethical sides of that, but there are some silver linings here because it is enabling us to maybe go a little bit faster as a species, as a human race. We are seen to be able to some degree, harness some of this technology.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, you're right there. And I think that's something that is often kind of obscured by the kind of problem-focused discussion when it comes to ethics. Because sometimes more ethical, more better outcome in terms of people's lives comes out of using AI. That is very possible. It doesn't mean that AI is always problematic. We shouldn't use it. We shouldn't experiment with it. Of course, there are many things that we can do with it that can actually make our lives better. But what is missing from the discussion is to actually figure out what those things are, where we should use AI, where it actually makes things better. We're facing a huge hype in generative AI. It should be I've heard so many comments saying that we have to use AI here and there, and everyone has to start using it now in everything they do. It's not necessarily that actually makes our lives better. So we would actually need to engage more in the reflection of the goals we want to have in our own lives, the goals we want to have as a society, almost as a humanity, to make sure that the technologies that we actually put our money in are the ones that benefit us, that bring in those ethical outcomes, make our decision-making better when it comes to deciding for, let's say, social benefits and so on. But we are, in many of these cases, we still need to work out these very crucial issues to actually get those benefits. So in the development, I would love to see much more this collaboration that actually fosters the ethical innovation of these technologies in a way that benefits everyone and brings these fundamental benefits that we have. Yes, because it's a great tool when it's used for great things, but very, very bad tool when used mindlessly. So that's something to take into consideration for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of work still to be done, not just by the technical side of AI, but from a government, from a legislation perspective, from a corporate business perspective, and from an end user perspective too, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
So there's an awful lot to consider here. One question I've got for you though, as somebody who is very much focused on this space, you're sort of the go-to person when it comes to, you know, the AI ethics side of things. You know, you're looking at the future of ethics in this AI world that we now live in. How are you staying abreast of what's important? How do you focus on, you know, the important information? Because I say that in the context that these new LLMs, these new generative AI models, they haven't been with us that long. They kind of got popular within the last sort of 12 months or so. I know they've been around for many years before that in different guises, but today we see everything from text to video, we see deep fakes, we see the rapid evolvement, you know, whether it's OpenAI or whether it's Google, whoever, releasing new and new models. And every time they release something, we kind of go, wow, look what we can now do. And it seems to be racing ahead. So how do you keep your finger on the pulse? How do you stay ahead when you look at it through your AI ethicist sort of lens?
I think for me, to get those very freshest updates on developments in AI and also in responsible, sustainable, ethical AI, I think it's mostly LinkedIn in that way. So I think that's when you build yourself a very high quality network there, when you follow the sources that actually bring you quality information there, then it can be a really good tool for information gathering in that way to keep up with everything that comes in. At the same time, I try to balance that with doing actual research, so academic research. I have several publications that I follow actively and do active research updates for myself as well. And that's a really big part of making sure that not everything is market oriented that I get, because of course LinkedIn algorithm works in its magical ways. So I do not want to find myself in this very, very closed bubble of thinkers that I happen to like and that happen to resonate with my thinking. So I try to make sure that the sources are very varied. I'm trying to make sure my following consists of business sources, of researchers, of people in ethics from different perspectives, NGOs, and also governmental organizations, to have as varied sources of information as possible to gather the knowledge and to process it. Because in that way, you also make sure that you see the variety of information that is out there, and you kind of learn to make your own conclusions based on the things you gather. So that kind of forces you to do reflection, to think, why are these messages kind of different from different sources? But yeah, LinkedIn works really great for just keeping up to date with everyday updates and developments, and sometimes it's good to just shut it for a week, not to know all the information overload. But I think that's part of the nature of AI development at this point, because we have constant updates, but at the same time they're not always as new as marketing makes it sound like. So we've had AI for a long time. We will have different technologies come and go. So a lot of it is also hype. So there's no harm done just shutting down all the communication for a week, or even 2 or even 3. So yeah, I think we're maybe making it a bit too hurried, a bit too fast-paced ourselves when we are trying to keep up with everything that happens. It kind of makes this sense of urgency. Now everyone has to jump in, but in reality, we could actually take it quite easy and just figure out what we want to do before we do things.
Yeah, and to follow on from that then, do you feel that there's a huge education gap here? Because you've used terms like responsible AI and sustainable AI. And do you think that most businesses get this, or do you think there is a huge educational gap here? Because it has gone pretty quick to most people, most companies.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, companies are, and other organizations as well, are getting more and more educated, more and more. At least they acknowledge that this is something that they have to look into. Maybe it's because of regulation. Maybe it's because they've seen that some companies do well. They do quality solutions. They are gaining popular trust because they can show that they are doing good in these areas. So. And maybe their talents, their workers are actually just happier because they know they are doing something that works for people and actually matches their values as well. So all these benefits are kind of getting more and more seen that come out of doing sustainable AI. But still, it's still in very beginning, I'd say. So especially in the education, like engineering education, data science education, all the kind of technical positions that we have, very rarely they have like any obligatory curriculum in anything related to sustainable or responsible ethical AI or technology in general. It doesn't just need to be AI focused, but like ethics in general when it comes to technology. And that is, I say, a huge educational gap that it's really hard to pinpoint where's the responsibility. Is it in universities? Is it even earlier in like primary education or secondary education, high school education, or is it for the workplaces to make sure that their people know how to use AI responsibly, or at least even like to just make sure that there is a sufficient level of AI literacy? EU AI Act tries to address AI literacy to an extent, but we will see how that actually manifests itself and whether they are there's actually a mechanism to make sure that the AI literacy is on a sufficient level, and what the sufficient level will be according to
So I don't want to put you on the spot,
Mhm.
but based on what you've said, and you're keeping your own finger on the pulse, you're networking with the right people on LinkedIn, you're staying abreast of what's going on. But do you have any advice for others who want to maybe understand a bit more about responsible AI, sustainable AI, and the ethical side of it? If you're talking to a company or an organization or a body, whether it's through women in AI or through sort of more corporate endeavors that you're involved in, what advice do you find yourself often giving for people that are interested in this topic?
I think it's just important to share your knowledge. So be interested, go through the sources, do your research, try to make sure that you have figure out for yourself, like what are your own values after doing research, listen to people from different backgrounds, and then make your own reflection on your own values and your own beliefs. And when you have that stance, when you figure out for yourself what you actually think is the right thing to do here, then just not to compromise on things that you find important, whether it's being responsible AI, then just go for it. Share your knowledge, share your opinions, share your insight on what you've gathered through your research, through your discussions with different people from industry and academia, in your just own networks, people who use AI, people who never used AI, but have, of course, they still have a say on what it does to our environments and societies. So just to be courageous and try different things. For example, I started with research mostly, then I put up my own company. I did consulting as a freelancer before going to Solita, an IT consultancy that I work for now. And I still have the company, just to do some gigs here and there. So try what works out for you. It might be that you want to fly solo as a freelancer. You might want to join a network of professionals that you don't need your own company for. It might be volunteering, such as Women in AI or some other. Alltech is Human is an organization that I also volunteer through and made great connections through. And then it might be an expert network, like I, for instance, was part of, or I'm part of the Ethical Intelligence, which collects people who have expertise in ethical AI from different fields, some are industry experts, some are academics, and some just generally interested and knowledgeable about the topic, to do consulting gigs here and there and these kind of things. So just to go through and find people, meet people, ask them how did they make it to their position where they are now, how did they make it happen, and then you suddenly find yourself in interesting situation, interesting events, and meet interesting people. And that always, like when you do that based on what you believe in, then that's going to lead you to great situations, I believe.
What I really like about what you've said there, Salla, is that in this great technological revolution that is AI, a lot of the secret magic is still about connecting the humans together. I really like that. So that's
Yes.
fantastic to hear. Now, I've got another question for you. As you look forward, the year ahead, 6, 12, 18 months, what does the roadmap look like? What's on your horizon? How do you go about planning for this? Because you couldn't have picked a busier industry to be involved in, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting year in general. I have several client projects that I'm taking on. Most of them are related to AI governance, to putting on AI governance models and frameworks and practices in place to make sure that for example, all generative AI experiments that are going on in these organizations are conducted responsibly and in a way that actually brings them value in long term, sustainable value in the long term. So those are probably, or they are going to take the biggest portion of my time, because that's what I'm doing full time currently. But in addition, I hope to be able to spend also a good proportion of time with research. So making sure that we advance also in the field of academic research in AI ethics, because that's also something that is still, even though it's growing, it's still, let's say, in its infancy, I'd like to say. So to contribute through both of those, the academic side and the industry side, is what I'm going to focus on. But yeah, to focus more and more on making the impact, helping actual organizations, helping whether it's companies, whether it's public sector organizations, to figure out where their position in this whole AI mess. It sometimes seems to be a mess. Maybe just try to make it sure that they don't feel like being in such a messy position, that they might feel that they are actually have a clear path in front of them that is going to drive them towards sustainable and ethical value out of AI.
Sounds like a good plan. Finally, before we run out of time, is there anything else you'd like to share with our worldwide audience listening or watching this episode? And plus, the other thing I want you to do is, if people want to reach out and find out more about the work that you do, where's this place to point people to, Salla?
Whether I want to share something, I think maybe the key message I want, if someone who listens to this wants to take home, is I mean, there's no need to hurry. You don't need to use AI every day if you don't want to, if it doesn't really help you with anything. You don't have to use it for everything. You don't have to follow social media every minute to stay up to date with new large language models or co-pilots here and there. I mean, you can choose. What really matters is that you figure out what brings value to your life, what brings value to your community, your society, and how could you make your own meaningful life fit together with everyone else's. So basically do this reflection often enough to reflect, okay, why would I want to use this AI? Is it just because I feel pressure to do so, or is there actually something I want to achieve with it? And if I want to achieve with something with it, is it something that's actually ethically viable? Is it something I should be doing, even though I could be doing it? So have this constant reflection and make sure that the decisions you make about using AI, for instance, are actually aligned with those values and beliefs you have. And you could justify them to anyone who asks you, why did you choose to use AI here? So that kind of public mirror is sometimes a good tool for making sure that you are comfortable with your decisions on value level. And then just enjoy and experiment with what comes up, because that's often something that we get stressed about. Is there anything I can use without thinking about ethics? In a way, no, because we always have to, every action needs some ethical reflection, but at the same time, of course, it's okay to experiment and try out new technologies, just to be very open and honest about the reasons why, and very clear about what you're doing for yourself. So maybe that's the message. Maybe it was quite a messy message, but yes, relax, reflect, and try out different things. And if you want to learn more about what I do, I try to semi-regularly publish insights on LinkedIn. So that's a great place to go and follow me. You can also always contact me via LinkedIn. It's a great place. I also leave my other links there. So basically no other social media you find me on. LinkedIn is the only one. It's kind of the only one I can handle. So yeah, I think LinkedIn is the best to find me.
Well, look, that brings us lovely to the end of our episode together today, Salla, unfortunately. But I want to thank, first of all, everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode around the world. I want to ask them to make sure to follow, like, and subscribe to the podcast, and to also join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Salla. But thank you, Salla, for being a guest on the Global Discussion today. It's been a fascinating conversation. Continued success in everything that you're doing. And we'll talk to you again soon. So thank you, Salla. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Nice to chat with you, and we'll chat again in the future, I hope.